Victor, a devoted Russian sheep farmer, and his spouse were distraught to learn they couldn't conceive. But then, one chilly winter's night, they became parents in a bizarre twist of fate. You might wonder, how? The response is as astounding as it is startling. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. The narrative starts in Russia in 1983. Victor was a passionate sheep farmer who put in a lot of effort throughout the summer to raise his animals humanely and maintain their safety. Since he was a youth, this had been his passion, and he adored spending every summer outside with his sheep, doing what he liked most. He would shear the sheep and sell the wool in the spring. In order to bring the next generation of animals into the world and prepare them for sale, he would also assist with the breeding of the lambs. He would sow seeds in the late summer and wait for them to sprout in order to reap the benefits of the harvests and earn some cash. He was undoubtedly a busy man. Victor was so proficient at his work that it appeared as though his sheep loved his company as much as he did theirs. It was not uncommon for them to run in his direction to welcome him when they noticed him coming. However, because of the extreme severity of Russian winters, raising sheep outside was not a possibility. It was practically a given that if you were outside for too long, it would get quite chilly. He therefore made clothes to get them through the cold season throughout the winter months with his devoted wife. Victor's life was like this, going through endless cycles of summer sheep husbandry, winter garment production, and so on. Fortunately, he was happy and satisfied with his life and enjoyed it that way. However, there was one thing lacking from his life: kids. Though his hectic work had always stood in the way, Victor and his wife had always discussed their desire to start a family. Victor and his spouse made the decision to begin attempting to conceive after realizing that Victor would not be youthful and robust for the remainder of their lives. They continued to attempt unsuccessfully to become pregnant for several months. Despite everything, they remained optimistic and kept trying. But as the months passed, they began to feel depressed about not becoming pregnant. After many months, a year passed, then two, and yet there was no evidence that Victor's wife was pregnant. However, keep in mind that this was the 1980s, and medical technology was not as advanced as it is now. Victor and his spouse could not afford IVF, which was still in its infancy, and there was no contemporary technology to help with the reproductive process. It was a sad truth that this beloved couple would never be able to conceive. In spite of their greatest attempts, they appeared doomed to be childless. They were devastated by this news, and Victor's wife quickly experienced a severe depressive episode due to her inability to conceive. She was so unhappy and desperate that she even advised Victor get a divorce and locate a woman who could give him the kid he had been longing for. But because he was a devoted husband and had the greatest love of his life, he chose to remain with his wife. They would overcome this and put their hearts back together. Victor continued to work as a farmer throughout this time, and in order to soothe his soul, he would spend hours conversing with the sheep about his deepest sentiments. He was glad to be occupied. Winter arrived again, and this time it was very harsh. The temperature had dropped to its lowest point in a while, and the snowfall was intense and rapid. Nevertheless, Victor needed to maintain his occupied schedule and tend to his sheep, who were securely housed in their barn. After putting on his warmest clothing, he went outdoors, but it was immediately apparent that something was off. There was a little gap in the barn gate. Victor used to always double-check things just in case, so he was positive he had locked it the previous evening. He hurried to the barn to make sure none of his prized animals had fled, but all of the sheep were there. How peculiar. Nevertheless, he dismissed it, attributing it to his weariness the previous evening and failing to double-check the lock. After putting out his sheep's feed, he joyfully watched as they raced outside to begin eating. But when he realized that one sheep was missing, his joy vanished in an instant. He quickly counted the animals again and determined that one of them had to have gotten out. He hurried out the door after that to look for her. He searched the entire yard for her, but he couldn't find her, so he headed out into the snow-covered fields. He looked for 30 minutes before noticing anything beneath a far-off tree. He ran to investigate and saw that it was his lost sheep, partially buried in the snow. But the poor thing, why was she there? Before long, The explanation was obvious. She was shielding something by sitting on top of it. Victor was surprised to see 3 babies and a short handwritten letter when he coaxed the sheep up. Clearly, the sheep had found the kids the day before and shielded them from the elements. He noted that the 3 of them were pleasantly warm, but he still clutched them close as he hurried back to his house, stuffing the message into his pocket. He showed his wife what he had found: 2 baby boys and a newborn girl, blowing through the door. The age of these triplets was just a year. Recognizing that the kids were likely famished after spending a long night outside, Victor's wife hurried to the kitchen to cook a light dinner. He noticed the message next to the infants and recalled it after making sure they were fed and kept warm. Taking it from his pocket, he examined the scrawled words. The message said rather simply, "Pardon me, I have no money to take care of you. Kindly lead long and contented lives." What Victor and his spouse had just read had taken them by surprise. It was obvious that these miserable pups had been purposefully left behind, and their survival was only made possible by his sheep's maternal instincts. Victor placed the triplets in a makeshift crib and then left for the adjacent town in the hopes of discovering any information on the triplets' origins. Unfortunately, most of the residents of the town were past the age of reproductive potential and somewhat elderly. Victor was completely lost for words. He was very confused about what to do with the infants when he got home. Do they give them over to the police, or do they continue to look for their mother? But it soon became obvious that keeping them to themselves would be the wisest course of action as he opened the door and found his cherished wife softly singing to the little 3. They had always desired to have children, and it seemed as though God had granted them 3 little miracles. After talking things over, the couple decided to give the kids the life they deserved and raise them as their own. They would not let this chance pass them by. The infants grew older throughout the years, playing in the garden and assisting their father with the care of his sheep by the time they were 5 years old. Unfortunately, one of the sheep was aging and becoming lethargic, and it didn't seem like she would live for much longer than a few days. The triplets gathered around the elderly sheep and caressed her, developing a strong attachment with her. They had no idea that this sheep had been instrumental in their survival all those years before. Nevertheless, the sheep's time was almost out, and she lay down, placed her head on the ground, closed her eyes, and died quietly while the kids caressed her. Although Victor had observed countless instances of death, his children had never experienced it. Feeling devastated, they fled to the fields and gathered beneath the tree where they were discovered. When an elderly woman noticed the youngsters weeping and distraught, she inquired as to whether they had recently been informed that Victor and his wife weren't their biological parents. The triplets were quite perplexed and disturbed when it became clear that the elderly woman had made a mistake, and they hurried home with a lot of questions. Now that the truth was known, Victor and his spouse sat the kids down and told them what had transpired that terrible night. To support the claim, they even showed them the letter that was placed next to them. Despite being obviously saddened by the fact that their biological parents had abandoned them, the kids were incredibly appreciative to Victor and his wife for saving them and treating them like their own. They had 2 options. Either they had given them over to the authorities and sent them to a terrible orphanage, or they had just let them freeze to death in the bitter weather. Rather, they chose to keep them and provide the best life could provide. The 5 members of the family shared a hug while the gentle sound of the sheep filled the air during the warm summer wind. What are your thoughts on this tale then? When you discovered the triplets, how would you have responded? Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.